The iron shackles bit into Sebastian Lawson's wrists as the council elder read his sentence aloud. But the physical pain barely registered compared to the humiliation burning through his chest. 3 years of distinguished military service on the northern border meant nothing now, not after he had struck a superior officer who had been beating a captured orc child for sport. The courtyard was packed with townspeople who had once called him a hero, their faces now twisted with disgust or pity, and Sebastian kept his eyes fixed on the wooden platform beneath his boots, refusing to meet their stares. For the crime of insubordination and assault upon Captain Hendricks, you are hereby stripped of your rank and lands. The elder continued, his voice echoing off the stone walls of the fortress. Furthermore, as punishment befitting your sympathies toward the enemy, you shall be bound in marriage to the orc prisoner Grusha, daughter of Warchief Durak. She is cast out from her people for refusing to participate in their raids against human settlements. 2 outcasts, bound together in exile. Perhaps you will find the companionship of monsters more agreeable than that of civilized men. Laughter rippled through the crowd, cruel and mocking. Sebastian finally lifted his head, anger flashing in his dark eyes as he scanned the faces of people he had once protected. The elder gestured toward the garrison entrance, and 2 guards emerged, dragging a figure between them. She was tall, nearly Sebastian's height, with emerald-green skin that caught the afternoon sunlight. Her black hair hung in a thick braid down her back, and when she raised her head, Sebastian saw the small tusks protruding from her lower jaw and the defiant fire in her amber eyes. She wore the tattered remains of orcish warrior garb, and despite the chains binding her wrists and the bruises darkening her arms, she held herself with unmistakable dignity. Their eyes met across the courtyard, and Sebastian saw something flicker in her expression, quickly suppressed. Not fear exactly, perhaps resignation, perhaps the same bitter acceptance that he himself felt settling into his bones. You will be escorted to the abandoned homestead at the edge of the thornwood, the elder announced. There you will remain, both of you, forbidden from entering any human settlement or orcish territory. Supplies will be delivered monthly, provided you cause no trouble. This is the mercy of the council. Be grateful it is not the noose. Sebastian wanted to spit at their feet, to tell them what they could do with their mercy, but years of military discipline held his tongue. The guards unlocked his shackles only to immediately bind his wrists again with rope, then did the same to the orc woman. They were loaded onto a wagon like cargo, surrounded by 6 armed men who looked at them both with equal contempt. The wagon lurched into motion, and the fortress gates groaned shut behind them with a finality that made Sebastian's stomach clench. For the first hour of the journey, neither of them spoke. The orc woman sat across from him in the wagon bed, her back straight despite the uncomfortable jostling of the wheels over the rutted road. Sebastian studied her when he thought she was not looking, noting the way her jaw clenched when they hit a particularly rough patch, the careful way she kept her bound hands in her lap. She was younger than he had first thought, perhaps close to his own 26 years, and there was something haunting about the set of her features. "You speak the common tongue?" Sebastian finally asked, keeping his voice low enough that the guards would not hear over the clatter of hooves and wheels. She turned those amber eyes on him, measuring him for a long moment before responding. "I speak it." Her voice was deeper than a human woman's, with a slight rasp that reminded him of smoke. Better than most humans speak Orcish. There was no hostility in her tone, only a statement of fact. Sebastian nodded slowly. "My name is Sebastian. Sebastian Lawson, formerly a lieutenant in the border guard." "I know who you are," she said, and something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched her lips. "The human who saved Gruck's son from Captain Hendricks. Word travels even in chains." She paused, then added, "I am Grusha, daughter of Durak, no longer welcome in the clan of my birth." "Why?" The question escaped before Sebastian could consider whether it was appropriate to ask. Grusha's expression hardened. "Because I refused to burn a human village where I knew children lived. Because I said there must be another way besides endless war. Because I dared to question whether the old hatreds serve anyone but death itself." She looked away toward the forest passing by on either side of the road. "My father gave me a choice. Lead the raid or be exiled. I chose exile." Sebastian felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of kinship that caught him off guard. "I struck my commanding officer because he was beating a child. Your people's child. I had watched him brutalize prisoners for months, always with some excuse about intelligence gathering or discipline. When I saw him standing over that boy with a whip, something in me broke." "Gruck's son lived?" Grusha asked, turning back to him with sudden intensity. "He lived. I made sure of it. Got him to the prisoner exchange point 2 days early, claimed he was too injured to be useful. The Orcish envoy took him back across the border." Sebastian's lips twisted bitterly. "For all the good it did. Hendricks recovered in a week, and here I am." "Here we are," Grusha corrected softly, "bound together by our foolish compassion." They fell silent again, but it was a different quality of silence now. Not hostile or wary, but the quiet of two people who had found unexpected common ground in the ruins of their former lives. The sun was beginning to set when the wagon finally rolled to a stop in front of a small homestead that had clearly been abandoned for some time. The main house was sturdy enough, built from rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney, but the garden was overgrown and the barn door hung crooked on its hinges. The guards hauled them out of the wagon with more force than necessary, cutting their bonds only after Sebastian and Grusha were standing in front of the sagging porch. One of the guards, a heavy-set man with a scar across his nose, tossed a burlap sack at Sebastian's feet. "Basic supplies," he growled. "Food for 2 weeks, some tools. A wagon will come once a month with more, assuming you have not done anything stupid. Try to run, and we will hunt you down like the animals you are." He swept his gaze over both of them with disgust. "Enjoy your punishment, traitors." The guards climbed back onto the wagon and departed without another word, leaving Sebastian and Grusha standing in the gathering dusk. Sebastian rubbed his wrists where the rope had chafed the skin raw, then bent to pick up the supply sack. It was lighter than he had hoped. When he looked up, he found Grusha watching him with an unreadable expression. "Well," Sebastian said, injecting false cheer into his voice, "I suppose we should see what we are working with. Ladies first." Grusha's eyebrows rose slightly at the courtesy, but she moved past him to push open the door. It stuck for a moment, then gave way with a screech of protesting hinges. The interior was dim and dusty, but Sebastian could make out the basic layout as his eyes adjusted. One main room served as kitchen and living space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. 2 smaller rooms branched off to the sides, likely bedrooms. The furniture was minimal: a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, a few shelves, and what looked like the frame of a bed visible through one of the doorways. "It is better than a cage," Grusha said, and Sebastian heard the exhaustion creeping into her voice now that they were alone. "I have slept in worse places." Sebastian set the supply sack on the table and began unpacking it, taking inventory. Dried meat, a small sack of grain, some root vegetables, a loaf of hard bread, 2 thin blankets, a knife, an axe, and a tinderbox. It was enough to survive, barely if they were careful. He became aware that Grusha had not moved from the doorway, and when he glanced at her, He saw the way she held herself, the tension in her shoulders suggesting pain. "Are you hurt?" he asked, moving toward her instinctively. Grusha stiffened, one hand moving protectively to her ribs. "It is nothing. The guards were not gentle during my capture. Let me see." Sebastian kept his voice calm and professional, the tone he had used countless times with injured soldiers under his command. When Grusha hesitated, he added, "I have field medicine training. If you have broken ribs and they puncture something, you could die. We are stuck here together, so we might as well keep each other alive." After a long moment, Grusha nodded and moved to the table, sitting on one of the chairs. She carefully lifted the torn edge of her leather tunic, revealing the green skin of her torso, which was mottled with purple and black bruises. Sebastian had seen enough injuries to recognize the pattern of boot strikes. Fury flashed through him, hot and sudden, at the thought of men kicking her while she was already bound and helpless, but he forced it down and focused on the examination. "Take a deep breath," he instructed, and watched the movement of her ribcage carefully as she complied. When she winced but did not cry out, he nodded. "Bruised badly, but I do not think anything is broken. You were lucky, or very tough, probably both." He moved to the supply sack and tore a strip from one of the blankets, then returned to her side. "This is going to hurt, but wrapping your ribs will help them heal." "May I?" Grusha looked at him for a long moment, and Sebastian realized this might be the first time a human had asked her permission for anything in weeks. She nodded slowly, and he began to wrap the makeshift bandage around her torso, working as gently as he could. She held perfectly still, though he could feel the tension in her body each time his hands made contact with her skin. "Why are you doing this?" Grusha asked quietly as he worked. "They sent you here to be punished. I am meant to be your punishment. You could let me suffer, make your own anger at this situation known. Instead, you tend my wounds." Sebastian secured the bandage and stepped back, meeting her eyes. "Because you are not my punishment, you are not my enemy. You are a person who has been hurt, and I know how to help, so I am helping. It is really that simple." He paused, then added with a wry smile, "Besides, if the point of this punishment was to force me into the company of monsters, they made a critical error. You have more honor than most of the men I served with." Something shifted in Grusha's expression, a crack in the defensive wall she had built around herself. She ducked her head, and Sebastian wondered if orcs could blush beneath their green skin. "Thank you," she said, so quietly he almost missed it, "for the healing, and for the words. You are welcome." Sebastian turned away to give her privacy as she adjusted her clothing, busying himself with sorting the rest of their supplies. "We should probably figure out sleeping arrangements. There seem to be 2 bedrooms, which works well enough. You take whichever one you prefer, and I will take the other. Tomorrow we can assess what needs to be done to make this place actually livable." Grusha stood, testing the wrap he had applied. "You would give me first choice of the rooms. You would not demand I sleep in the barn or claim the better space for yourself." Sebastian turned back to her, confused by the question. "Why would I do that? We are both stuck here. We might as well be comfortable." He gestured around the run-down homestead. "This is not exactly a palace. I suspect neither room is significantly better than the other anyway." She studied him again with that penetrating gaze, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Finally, she nodded. "I will take the smaller room. You are bigger. You need more space." Before Sebastian could protest, she had picked up one of the blankets and disappeared through the doorway on the left. Sebastian took the other blanket and explored the remaining room. It was indeed slightly larger, though calling either space generous would be a wild exaggeration. The bed frame had no mattress, but there was a layer of old straw in one corner that he could pile on it. He made a mental note to add proper bedding to the list of things they desperately needed. As he worked to make the space marginally more comfortable, he heard sounds of movement from Grusha's room, then the soft thud of her settling onto her own bed frame. The house fell silent except for the creaking of old wood and the distant sounds of the forest beyond the walls. Sebastian lay down on his makeshift bed, pulling the thin blanket over himself, and stared at the dark ceiling. This was his life now. Exile with a stranger of a different species in a broken-down homestead at the edge of nowhere. He should be angry, should be plotting revenge or escape. Instead, all he felt was a strange sense of calm. For the first time in 3 years, he did not have to follow orders from men like Hendricks. He did not have to watch atrocities happen in the name of security. He was free, in a twisted way. And Grusha, despite everything the council had intended, did not seem like punishment at all. She seemed like someone who had made the same choice he had, to stand for something decent in a world that punished decency. That was more than he could say for most of the people he had left behind. Sebastian closed his eyes and let exhaustion pull him under, aware of the strange comfort of knowing he was not alone in this exile. Morning came with pale light filtering through gaps in the walls, and Sebastian woke to the sound of someone moving around in the main room. He sat up, momentarily disoriented, before the events of the previous day came rushing back. He pulled on his boots and emerged from the bedroom to find Grusha crouched by the fireplace, coaxing a small fire to life with the tinderbox and some kindling she must have gathered from outside. "Good morning," he said, and she glanced over her shoulder at him. "Morning." She turned back to the fire, adding a few larger pieces of wood once the flames caught properly. "I found a pot in the corner. I thought I would make porridge from the grain if you do not object." "Object." "That sounds wonderful." Sebastian moved to the table and began examining the vegetables they had been provided. "I can dice some of these to add to it, make it more filling." They worked in companionable silence, Grusha preparing the pot while Sebastian cut the vegetables into rough chunks with the knife. It struck him as oddly domestic, this quiet cooperation, but he found he did not mind. When the porridge was ready, they sat across from each other at the table and ate from wooden bowls Sebastian found on one of the shelves. "This place needs a lot of work," Grusha said between bites, looking around the room with a critical eye. "The roof is sound enough, but there are gaps in the walls that will be miserable come winter. The barn needs repairs if we hope to keep any animals. The garden is salvageable, but it will take time." Sebastian nodded, impressed by her practical assessment. "You know farming." "My clan was not always at war. In times of peace, we grew crops, raised livestock. I learned these things before I learned to fight." She set down her bowl, her expression turning thoughtful. "If we are to survive here, we will need more than the monthly supplies. We need to be self-sufficient. That means repairing this homestead, planting a proper garden, perhaps hunting in the forest." "Agreed. I have some farming knowledge, though I am better with a sword than a plow." Sebastian allowed himself a small smile. "But I am a fast learner, and it seems we have nothing but time." Over the next few weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Sebastian repaired the barn while Grusha cleared and prepared the garden for late-season planting. They worked from dawn until dusk, stopping only for simple meals and necessary rest. The physical labor was exhausting, but Sebastian found it oddly satisfying. There was something clean about working with his hands, about building and growing instead of destroying. As they worked, they talked. Not constantly, but in fits and starts, sharing pieces of themselves when the moment felt right. Sebastian learned that Grusha had been training as a shaman before she was forced into the warrior path, that she knew the properties of herbs and could identify edible plants in the forest. She learned that he had grown up on a farm before joining the military, that he had a younger sister he would likely never see again. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a particularly long day, Grusha asked the question Sebastian had been dreading. "The council called this a marriage," she said, staring into the flames. "Do you consider us married?" Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "I consider us two people who have been bound together by forces outside our control. What we make of that binding is up to us." He looked at her directly. "I will not force anything upon you, Grusha. Not companionship beyond what you freely give, and certainly not anything more intimate. As far as I am concerned, we are partners in survival. What else we might become, if anything, will happen naturally or not at all." Grusha met his eyes, and Sebastian saw relief there, mixed with something else he could not quite name. "I was told that human men take what they want from women they consider property, that I should expect violence." "Then you were told lies," Sebastian said firmly. "Or at least, overgeneralizations. Are there human men who would do such things? Yes, and I have known some of them. I did not like them much. But there are also men who believe in treating others with dignity and respect, regardless of species or circumstance. I try to be one of those men." "You succeed," Grusha said softly. "I did not expect kindness here. I did not expect to be treated as an equal. Every day you surprise me." Sebastian felt warmth spread through his chest at her words. "You surprise me too. You are resourceful, skilled, and you have a better sense of humor than most humans I know. Yesterday, when you made that joke about the chicken that wandered into our yard being a scout for an invasion, I laughed harder than I have in months." Grusha's lips curved into a genuine smile, and Sebastian was struck by how much it transformed her face. The chicken was very suspicious. It had the eyes of a spy. They both laughed, and the sound filled the small house with unexpected warmth. When the laughter faded, Sebastian found himself reluctant to break the comfortable atmosphere. They sat in silence for a while longer, watching the fire burn down to coals before retiring to their separate rooms. The monthly supply wagon arrived on schedule, and the guard who delivered it looked around the homestead with barely concealed surprise. The barn had been repaired. The garden was neatly planted and already showing signs of growth, and the house itself looked considerably more lived in. Sebastian and Grusha stood together on the porch, and the guard's eyes narrowed at the sight of them side by side, clearly not meeting his expectations of misery and conflict. "Additional supplies," the guard grunted, dropping a larger sack than usual on the ground. "Council says to tell you that, if you continue causing no trouble, they will provide seeds and perhaps a goat on the next delivery." "Thank them for their overwhelming generosity," Sebastian said dryly, earning a sharp look from the guard and a barely suppressed snort of amusement from Grusha. After the guard left, they opened the supply sack together. Along with the usual food staples, there was a length of fabric, some soap, and a small bottle of lamp oil. Simple things, but luxuries in their current situation. "A goat," Grusha said, turning to look at the repaired barn. "That would help. Milk, eventually cheese. Perhaps they are not trying to kill us slowly after all. Or they have realized that having us successfully survive here makes them look merciful without actually requiring much effort on their part," Sebastian countered, but he was smiling. "Either way, I will not say no to a goat." Summer deepened into early autumn, and the homestead continued to transform. The garden yielded vegetables that supplemented their stored food, and Sebastian managed to trade some of their surplus to a traveling merchant for additional tools and seeds, despite the merchant's obvious discomfort at dealing with an orc. Grusha's ribs healed completely, and Sebastian noticed she moved with a fluid grace that spoke of warrior training. Sometimes in the mornings, he would watch from the window as she practiced forms with a wooden staff she had carved, her movements precise and powerful. He began to look forward to their evenings by the fire, to the conversations that ranged from practical matters to philosophical questions about the war and their respective cultures. Grusha was intelligent and thoughtful, challenging his assumptions while remaining open to his perspectives. More than once, he found himself thinking that she would have made an excellent officer if the world were different. It was during one of these evening conversations that Sebastian realized he was developing feelings that went beyond friendship or partnership. Grusha was laughing at something he had said, her head thrown back and her eyes crinkled with genuine mirth, and he felt his heart skip in his chest. The firelight cast a warm glow on her green skin, and he noticed for the first time the small scar above her left eyebrow, the way her tusks caught the light, the elegant point of her ears. She was beautiful. The thought struck him with the force of revelation, followed immediately by a wave of confusion and fear. This was not supposed to happen. They were survivors, partners, nothing more. Developing romantic feelings was a complication neither of them needed, especially given the circumstances of their exile. Sebastian forced himself to look away, to focus on the fire instead of her face. If Grusha noticed the change in his demeanor, she did not comment on it. But as the evening wore on, he caught her glancing at him when she thought he was not looking, and he wondered if perhaps he was not alone in this inconvenient development of emotion. The promised goat arrived with the next monthly supply, a sturdy female with brown and white markings. Grusha immediately claimed responsibility for the animal, naming her petal with a straight face that dared Sebastian to comment on the incongruously delicate name. They built a proper enclosure in the barn, and Grusha proved to be as skilled with animal husbandry as she was with everything else. "My mother kept goats," she explained one morning as she milked Petal with practiced hands. "Before the war intensified, before everything became about fighting and raiding, I used to help her every morning. It was peaceful work." Sebastian leaned against the barn door, watching her work. "Do you miss your family?" Grusha's hands stilled for a moment before resuming their rhythm. "Every day. My mother wept when I was exiled, but she could not speak against my father's decision. My younger brother gave me his knife in secret before I was taken away. I lost it when the human soldiers captured me." She paused. "Do you miss yours?" "Yes. My parents are gone, died of fever 5 years ago, but my sister Clara is still out there somewhere. She married a merchant, moved to one of the eastern cities. I used to send her letters when I was stationed at the border fort, but I suppose she thinks I am dead now, or wishes I was, after what I did." "She would be proud of you," Grusha said firmly, looking up at him. "If she is a woman of any sense, she would be proud that her brother stood up for what was right, even at great cost." The certainty in her voice made Sebastian's throat tight with emotion. "Thank you for that. I hope you are right." Grusha stood, carrying the bucket of milk toward him. As she passed through the doorway, she paused close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body. "I am right. And your sister, if she knew me, would perhaps be grateful that you are not alone in this exile." She moved past him before he could respond, leaving Sebastian standing in the barn doorway with his heart pounding and his mind racing. There had been something in her tone, in the way she had looked at him, that suggested her feelings might mirror his own. But perhaps he was reading too much into it, seeing what he wanted to see. Autumn arrived in full, painting the forest in shades of gold and crimson. The first frost came earlier than Sebastian had expected, and they spent a frantic week harvesting everything from the garden that could be salvaged. Grusha proved invaluable during this time, knowing exactly how to preserve the vegetables, which could be stored fresh and which needed to be dried or pickled. They worked late into the nights, and the small root cellar Sebastian had excavated beneath the house filled with their winter stores. One evening, as they finished the last of the preserving work, Grusha stretched her arms over her head and groaned. "I think I have forgotten what it feels like to not smell like vinegar." Sebastian laughed, suddenly aware that he was not much better. "The stream is probably too cold for bathing now, but we could heat water for washing. Take turns, maintain some dignity." "Dignity," Grusha repeated, smiling. "Is that what we are calling it?" But she nodded. "You are right. We should make the effort. You go first while I clean up here." They had fallen into these patterns of courtesy and consideration, always giving each other privacy and space, despite the small confines of the house. Sebastian heated water in their largest pot and hauled it to his room, washing quickly in the chill air. When he emerged, dressed in his cleanest clothes, he found that Grusha had already heated more water for herself and was waiting by the fire. "Your turn," he said, gesturing to the pot. "I will be outside checking the barn door. The latch has been sticking." It was a transparent excuse to give her privacy, and they both knew it, but Grusha smiled at him with what looked like fondness before carrying the hot water to her room. Sebastian did actually check the barn door, then stood in the cool night air longer than necessary, looking up at the stars. The same stars that had looked down on him his entire life, indifferent to the changes in his circumstances, to the strange and unexpected path his life had taken. When he returned to the house, Grusha was by the fire again, her hair loose from its usual braid and hanging in damp waves down her back. She wore a simple shift that they had made from the fabric in one of the supply deliveries, and in the firelight, with her hair down and her expression relaxed, Sebastian found her breathtaking. She looked up as he entered, and whatever she saw in his face made her own expression shift into something uncertain and hopeful. They stared at each other across the room, and Sebastian felt the weight of all the unspoken feelings that had been building between them for months. "Grusha," he began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. She stood, moving toward him with careful steps as if approaching something that might bolt. "Sebastian, I need to say something, and I do not know if I should, but the words have been trapped inside me for weeks now and I cannot hold them anymore." "I am listening," he managed, his voice rough. Grusha stopped an arm's length away from him, her amber eyes locked on his. "I did not expect this. Any of this. When they brought me here, I thought I was being given to you as a thing, as chattel. I prepared myself for cruelty or indifference at best. Instead, you have treated me with more kindness and respect than I have ever known from anyone, human or orc. You have worked beside me as an equal, protected me, cared for me. And somewhere in these months I have begun to feel things I did not think possible." Sebastian's heart was hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it. "What things?" She stepped closer, close enough now that he could see the flecks of gold in her eyes. "I think I am falling in love with you, Sebastian Lawson, and it terrifies me, because I do not know if such a thing is even possible. We are different species from cultures that have taught us to hate each other. We are exiles, outcasts. What kind of future could we possibly have?" Sebastian reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. Her skin was warm beneath his palms, and when she leaned into the touch, something in his chest unclenched. "I do not know what kind of future we can have," he said honestly, "but I know that I wake up every morning grateful to see you. I know that your smile makes me happier than anything has in years. I know that the thought of you leaving, of facing this life without you, makes my heart ache." He brushed his thumb across her cheekbone. I think I have been falling in love with you since the day you made me laugh about that suspicious chicken. And if you will have me, if you want this despite all the complications and uncertainties, then I am yours." Grusha's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and she raised her own hands to cover his where they rested on her face. "I want this. I want you. Not because we are forced together, but because I choose you. I choose this, whatever it becomes." Sebastian leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away to change her mind. But she met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, an exploration rather than a claim. But then, Grusha made a soft sound and pressed closer, and Sebastian wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest. They kissed until they were both breathless, until the fire had burned down to embers and the room was lit only by moonlight through the window. When they finally broke apart, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers, unwilling to put any distance between them. "I never thought I would be grateful for exile," he murmured. "But if this is what it took to find you, then I would make the same choice 1,000 times." Grusha laughed softly, the sound vibrating against his chest. "We are both fools, I think. Foolish, soft-hearted outcasts who cannot help but choose each other over the safety of our prejudices. Then let us be fools together." Sebastian kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose. "We have built a home here against all odds. We can build a life too." They stood wrapped in each other's arms as the last of the fire died, neither wanting to break the moment. Eventually, the cold drove them apart, and they banked the coals and prepared for bed. At the entrance to her room, Grusha paused and looked back at him. "Tomorrow," she said, and there was a promise in the word. "Tomorrow," Sebastian agreed, understanding what she meant. Tonight they would sleep separately, taking time to adjust to this new reality. But tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after, they would face together as something more than partners. Sebastian slept better that night than he had since his arrest. His dreams filled with green skin and amber eyes and the possibility of happiness in unexpected places. The days that followed had an almost dreamlike quality. They continued their work preparing for winter, but now there were stolen kisses while hauling firewood, hands that lingered when passing tools, smiles that held promises of the evening to come. They were still cautious, still learning the contours of this new relationship, but the joy in it was undeniable. One afternoon, about a week after their confession, Sebastian returned from checking his hunting traps to find Grusha in the garden, harvesting the last of the herbs she had been growing for medicinal purposes. She looked up at his approach and smiled, and something about the domestic perfection of the moment made Sebastian's decision crystallize. He knelt down beside her in the dirt, causing her to look at him with curiosity. Grusha, daughter of Durak, warrior and healer, keeper of suspicious chickens and stubborn goats. She laughed at his formal tone, but he continued. "We came here as punishment, bound by the decision of others, but I do not want to be bound to you by exile anymore. I want to be bound by choice." He reached into his pocket and pulled out what he had spent the last 3 evenings carving in secret. It was a small wooden ring, carved from a piece of oak and smoothed until it was soft as silk. He had worked the traditional Orcish marriage symbol into it, a design he had once seen on the armor of an Orcish envoy, alongside a human knotwork pattern his mother had taught him meant eternal love. "I know we have nothing to offer each other but this broken-down farm and a life at the edge of civilization. I know the world would call us cursed or mad. But I love you, and I want to marry you properly, with choice and intention rather than force. Will you be my wife, not because a council declared it, but because we both want it?" Grusha stared at the ring, then at him, her eyes wide with shock. You learned our marriage symbols, she whispered, touching the carved pattern with trembling fingers. How? I paid attention during the peace negotiations before the war escalated, and I asked the traveling merchant to describe them more fully, claimed I was curious about cultural practices. He smiled nervously. Was I too presumptuous? Is this not appropriate? It is perfect, Grusha said, and now tears were flowing freely down her cheeks. Yes, Sebastian. Yes, I will marry you, by choice, by love, by every reason that matters. Sebastian slipped the ring onto her finger, and she laughed through her tears at the sight of it on her green skin. Then she was pulling him into a kiss, heedless of the dirt on both of them, and Sebastian wrapped his arms around her and held on tight. They married themselves that evening in front of the fireplace, with no witnesses but the stars visible through the window. Grusha spoke the orcish marriage vows, her voice strong and clear, and Sebastian responded with the human equivalent. They mixed the traditions, creating something new that belonged only to them. When the vows were complete, Grusha said, "In my culture, the couple shares a meal they have prepared together to symbolize the life they will build." "In mine, we exchange gifts," Sebastian replied, "but I think your tradition makes more sense for us." They cooked together, making a simple stew from their stores but adding special touches, herbs and spices they had been saving. They ate slowly, feeding each other bites between kisses and laughter. And when the meal was done and the dishes cleaned, Sebastian took Grusha's hand and led her to his room, the larger of the two. "I have waited to ask," he said, suddenly nervous despite everything. "But if you wish, you need not sleep alone tonight. We are married now, truly married." "Unless you want more time." Grusha cupped his face in her hands, her smile tender. "I have been alone long enough. Tonight, I choose to be with my husband." They came together with reverence and joy, discovering each other slowly, learning what brought pleasure and comfort. Sebastian marveled at the trust Grusha showed him, at the vulnerability they shared in the joining of their bodies. It was nothing like he had imagined, better and more meaningful because of the love that flowed between them. Afterward, they lay tangled together under the blankets, Grusha's head on Sebastian's chest and his arms wrapped securely around her. The wind howled outside, a reminder that winter was truly coming, but inside they were warm and safe and content. "My husband," Grusha murmured, testing the word. "My wife," Sebastian responded, kissing the top of her head. "How strange and wonderful this all is." Winter descended on the homestead with shocking speed. Within 2 weeks of their marriage, the first serious snowfall arrived, blanketing everything in white. They had prepared well, and their stores were adequate, but the isolation was profound. The monthly supply wagon would not be able to reach them until the spring thaw, which meant they were truly alone. Sebastian found he did not mind at all. The long winter nights meant more time with Grusha, curled together by the fire or in their shared bed, talking about everything and nothing. She taught him orcish words and phrases, laughing at his pronunciation. He taught her songs from his childhood, amazed by her rich singing voice. They told each other stories, invented games to pass the time, and made love with increasing confidence and joy. There were hard days, too. Days when the firewood ran low and they had to venture into the bitter cold to replenish it. Days when cabin fever made them short-tempered with each other, leading to arguments that they had to work through. But they always apologized, always came back together, learning the give and take of true partnership. One particularly harsh evening, when the wind was so strong it shook the house, and the temperature had dropped below anything Sebastian had experienced, they huddled together under every blanket they owned. Grusha was shivering despite his best efforts to keep her warm, and Sebastian felt a spike of fear. Orcs were hardy, but even they had limits. "Tell me about summer," Grusha said through chattering teeth. "Tell me about the warmth." So Sebastian described in detail the summer days of his childhood on the farm, the feel of sun on skin, the smell of fresh cut hay, the taste of berries warm from the vine. He talked until his voice was hoarse, and slowly Grusha's shivering subsided. She fell asleep in his arms, and Sebastian held her tighter, sending a silent prayer to any gods that might be listening to let them survive this winter. The cold snap broke after 3 days, and they emerged from the house exhausted but alive. Grusha immediately went to check on Petal, who had weathered the storm well in her insulated corner of the barn. Sebastian cleared snow from the doorways and paths, his muscles protesting the effort after days of inactivity. "We made it," Grusha said that evening, standing beside him as they watched the sunset paint the snow in shades of pink and gold. "I was not sure we would during the worst of it. We will always make it," Sebastian said with more confidence than he felt. "Because we have each other, and that makes us stronger than any storm." Grusha leaned into his side, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They stood together until the last light faded and the cold drove them back inside, to the warmth and safety they had built together. The winter passed in a blur of snow and firelight and quiet domesticity. Sebastian carved more decorative items during the long dark hours, while Grusha worked on tanning the hides from the rabbits and deer he managed to trap. She had plans to make them proper winter clothes for the next year, determined that they would not be caught unprepared again. It was during one of these quiet evenings with Sebastian carving and Grusha stitching that she suddenly set down her work and pressed a hand to her stomach with a strange expression. "What is wrong?" Sebastian asked immediately, setting aside his project. "Are you feeling ill?" Grusha shook her head slowly, her eyes distant and focused inward. "No, not ill, just different." She looked up at him and he saw wonder in her face. "Sebastian, I think I might be with child." Sebastian felt the words hit him like a physical blow. A child, their child. The idea seemed impossible and miraculous in equal measure. "Are you certain? How can you tell?" "I am not entirely certain, but I have missed my monthly bleeding and there are other signs. The smell of the rabbit meat we cooked yesterday made me ill, though I had been fine with it before. And I have been so tired lately." She placed both hands on her stomach protectively. "If I am right, the baby will come late summer or early autumn." Sebastian moved to kneel in front of her, placing his hands over hers on her stomach. "A baby, our baby." He looked up at her, seeing his own mix of joy and terror reflected in her eyes. "We can do this. We will figure it out the same way we have figured everything else out." Grusha leaned forward to kiss him. "I know we will. I am not afraid, not truly. Surprised, yes, but not afraid. Not with you beside me." The knowledge of the pregnancy changed something in both of them. Their future, which had always been uncertain, suddenly had a shape to it, a reason beyond their own happiness. They began to plan in earnest for the arrival of a child, discussing what they would need, how they would manage. "We will need more food stores," Grusha said one morning at breakfast, "and cloth for swaddling. Additional firewood for next winter, because I will not be able to help haul it when I am heavily pregnant or recovering from birth. We will stock up during the spring and summer," Sebastian assured her. "I can take on more of the physical labor. You can focus on the garden and preparing for the baby. And we will need to figure out how to request specific supplies from the council without revealing that you are pregnant. I do not trust them not to use it against us somehow." As the weeks passed, and Grusha's pregnancy became more certain, they both marveled at the changes in her body. Her stomach began to swell slightly, and she complained good-naturedly about her breasts becoming tender. Sebastian found himself even more protective of her, though she laughed at his hovering. "I am pregnant, not broken," she reminded him when he tried to insist she stay inside during a late winter storm. "I have work to do, and so do you. The baby will be fine." But she allowed him his small indulgences, accepting his help with tasks that were becoming more difficult as her body changed. They had always worked well together, but now they moved with an even deeper synchronicity, partners in the truest sense. Spring arrived with dramatic suddenness, the snow melting to reveal the muddy ground beneath. The first supply wagon since autumn arrived 2 weeks later, and the guard who drove it stared at the homestead with barely concealed shock. Not only had they survived the winter, they appeared to be thriving. The house had new shutters, the barn's roof had been reinforced, and smoke rose cheerfully from the chimney. "Additional supplies," the guard said, his tone making it clear he had expected to find frozen corpses. "The council sends their regards and hopes you are well." "We are very well, thank you," Sebastian said, accepting the supply sack. "In fact, we have a request. We need additional cloth, if possible, and perhaps some items for basic carpentry. We are hoping to expand our living space." The guard's eyebrows rose. "Expand? You plan to stay here long-term?" "We have no other options," Grusha said flatly, appearing from the barn. Her pregnancy was not yet obvious under her loose tunic, and the guard gave her a dismissive glance before turning back to Sebastian. "I will pass along your requests. No promises." He climbed back onto the wagon, then paused. "The council will probably send someone to inspect in a few months. Make sure you are not causing trouble or planning anything foolish." After he left, Sebastian and Grusha exchanged glances. "An inspection," Grusha said. "That is concerning." "We have months to worry about it," Sebastian replied, though he shared her unease. "Let us focus on preparing for the baby and getting the spring planting done." The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Sebastian worked on building a cradle from wood he gathered in the forest, while Grusha transformed the spare fabric from the supply drops into swaddling clothes and small garments. The garden was planted with an expanded selection of vegetables, and Sebastian spent long days hunting and smoking meat to build up their stores. Grusha's pregnancy progressed steadily. By midsummer, her stomach had swelled noticeably, and Sebastian often caught her standing in the garden with her hands on her belly, a soft smile on her face. He loved these moments, loved seeing her so content and at peace. One evening, as they lay in bed, Grusha took Sebastian's hand and placed it on her stomach. "Wait," she whispered. "Just wait." Sebastian held perfectly still, and then he felt it, a flutter of movement beneath his palm. The baby. Their baby moving inside her. His eyes filled with tears, and when he looked at Grusha, he saw she was crying too. "That is our child," he said in wonder. "A real, living person, part of both of us. Half human, half orc," Grusha added softly. "A bridge between two worlds that hate each other." "I wonder what kind of life our child will have." Sebastian kissed her, tasting salt from her tears. "A life filled with love. That is what we can give them. Love and the knowledge that they were wanted, that they were chosen. The rest we will figure out together." The promised inspection arrived in late summer, when Grusha was 6 months pregnant and could no longer hide her condition. 3 council representatives arrived, including the elder who had sentenced them. They looked around the homestead with expressions ranging from surprise to suspicion. "You have done well here," the elder admitted grudgingly. "Better than we expected. The exile was meant as punishment, but you seem to have built a comfortable life." "We have worked hard," Sebastian said evenly, positioning himself slightly in front of Grusha. "We have caused no trouble as promised." One of the other representatives, a woman with sharp eyes, was staring at Grusha. She is with child, the woman said flatly. An abomination. A half-breed. Sebastian felt rage spike through him, hot and immediate, but Grusha placed a calming hand on his arm before he could speak. "My child is not an abomination," she said, her voice cold and controlled. "My child is a person, conceived in love and wanted by both parents. If you find that offensive, perhaps you should examine your own prejudices." The elder held up a hand before the sharp-eyed woman could respond. "Peace. We did not come here to debate philosophy." He looked at Sebastian directly. "A child complicates matters. You understand that. Neither human nor orc society will welcome them. Then it is good they will be raised here, where they are already loved and accepted," Sebastian replied. "We want nothing from the council except to be left alone to raise our family. Continue the supply drops if you wish, or do not. We will survive either way, but we will not allow you to judge our child before they are even born." The three representatives exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, the elder nodded. "Very well. The supply drops will continue, but understand this. If the child causes trouble, if there are any indications of violence or danger to nearby settlements, we will take action. Our child will be raised in peace," Grusha said firmly. "They will know both their heritages and be taught to honor both. We want no part of the conflicts between humans and orcs." After the representatives left, Sebastian and Grusha held each other on the porch, watching the wagon disappear into the distance. "They will always see our child as a threat," Grusha said quietly, "no matter what we do." "Then we will prove them wrong," Sebastian replied. "Our child will grow up knowing love and acceptance. They will be strong and kind, and they will show the world that bridges can be built. We just have to keep them safe until they are old enough to stand on their own." Grusha turned to look at him, her amber eyes fierce. "We will. I promise you, Sebastian. Our child will have the life we never did. They will be free in a way we never were." As summer faded into autumn and Grusha's due date approached, they made final preparations. Sebastian cleaned and organized the house obsessively, while Grusha gathered the herbs she would need for the birth. They had agreed she would act as her own midwife, drawing on her shamanic training unless something went seriously wrong. The nearest human settlement was miles away and would not welcome them in an emergency, so self-reliance was their only option. The labor began on a cool autumn evening, just as the first leaves were beginning to turn. Grusha woke Sebastian with a hand on his shoulder, her face calm despite the pain he could see in her eyes. "It is time." Sebastian had faced enemy soldiers without flinching, but the sight of Grusha in labor terrified him in a way war never had. He followed her instructions frantically, boiling water, gathering clean cloths, building up the fire. Grusha worked through the contractions with impressive focus, using breathing techniques she had learned from her mother. The labor was long and difficult. Hours passed with agonizing slowness, and Sebastian felt utterly helpless as he watched Grusha struggle. He held her hand, wiped sweat from her face, murmured encouragement, and wished desperately that he could do more. Finally, as dawn was breaking, their baby was born. A healthy, squalling infant with green-tinged skin lighter than Grusha's and a shock of dark hair. Sebastian cut the cord with shaking hands while Grusha wrapped the baby in clean cloth, and then she was placing the child in his arms. "A daughter," Grusha said, exhausted but radiant. "We have a daughter, Sebastian." Sebastian looked down at the tiny face, at the eyes that were trying to focus on him, and felt his world shift on its axis. This small, perfect person was his daughter, his and Grusha's. She had her mother's pointed ears but a more human-shaped face. Her small hands waved in the air, and he saw that her fingernails were more like orc claws than human nails. She was beautiful and unique and absolutely perfect. "What should we name her?" he asked, unable to look away from his daughter's face. Grusha thought for a moment, then smiled. "In Orcish tradition, children are named for the qualities we hope they will embody. I would name her Thura, which means hope in the old tongue, because she is our hope for a better future." "Thura," Sebastian repeated, testing the name. "Thura Lawson, it is perfect." He looked at Grusha, seeing the exhaustion and love in her face. "You were amazing, so strong. I am in awe of you." Grusha reached out to stroke their daughter's cheek with a gentle finger. "We did this together, my love, as we do everything." The first weeks with Thura were both joyful and exhausting. She was a hungry baby, feeding frequently, and Sebastian marveled at the way Grusha seemed to know instinctively what their daughter needed. He did what he could, changing soiled cloths, walking Thura around the house when she was fussy, singing her the songs his own mother had sung to him. Watching Grusha with their daughter, Sebastian fell in love with his wife all over again. She was patient and gentle, but also fiercely protective. When a wolf pack ventured too close to the homestead, Grusha took up her staff and drove them off with a ferocity that reminded Sebastian she was a trained warrior, despite the months of domestic life. As Thura grew, her unique heritage became more apparent. She had her mother's strength and her father's quick mind. Her skin remained that interesting shade between Grusha's deep green and Sebastian's pale tone. Her ears were pointed, her canines slightly more pronounced than a human child's but not as prominent as full Orcish tusks. She was beautiful in a way that transcended both human and Orc standards, something entirely her own. The supply wagon continued to arrive monthly, and the guards who drove it could not hide their curiosity about the child. Sebastian and Grusha kept Thura inside during these visits, unwilling to expose her to any potential hostility. But they knew that eventually, their daughter would have to face the world beyond their homestead. Thura's first birthday arrived with the turning of the seasons. Sebastian carved her a small wooden horse, while Grusha made her a doll from cloth and stuffed it with dried flowers. They celebrated with a special meal, and Thura laughed as she played with her new toys, blissfully unaware of how remarkable her very existence was. "She is so happy," Grusha observed, watching their daughter toddle around the main room. "She knows nothing of hatred or prejudice. Sometimes I wish we could keep her this innocent forever." "We will teach her," Sebastian said, pulling Grusha close. "We will teach her to be strong without being cruel, to be proud of both her heritages without diminishing either. She will know she is loved, and that will give her the foundation she needs to face whatever comes." As Thura grew from infant to toddler to young child, the homestead grew with her. Sebastian expanded the house, adding a proper bedroom for Thura with a window that looked out over the garden. They acquired chickens to go with Petal, who had produced 2 kids that now provided additional milk. The garden flourished year after year, and Sebastian became skilled enough at hunting to keep them well supplied with meat. Thura proved to be a bright, curious child with her mother's determination and her father's sense of humor. She learned to speak both Common Tongue and Orcish, switching between them effortlessly. Grusha taught her about herbs and healing, while Sebastian taught her to read and write using materials he traded for from the traveling merchant. They both taught her kindness, the most important lesson of all. When Thura was 5 years old, she asked the question they had been dreading. They were working in the garden together, Thura helping her mother plant seeds, when she looked up with her amber eyes so like Grusha's and said, "Mama, Papa, why do we live alone? The stories you tell have other people in them. Where are all the people?" Sebastian and Grusha exchanged glances over their daughter's head. They had known this day would come, but that did not make it easier. Grusha knelt down to Thura's level, brushing dirt from the child's cheek. "We live alone because the world is not always kind to those who are different," Grusha said gently. "Your papa is human and I am orc, and our peoples have been at war for a very long time. When we chose to love each other, we were sent here, away from both humans and orcs. But why?" Thura asked, her small face confused. "If you love each other, why does it matter?" "It should not matter," Sebastian said, coming to kneel beside Grusha. "And to us it does not, but to others it matters very much. They cannot see past their fear and hatred to understand that love is more important than the color of skin or the shape of ears." Thura touched her own pointed ears thoughtfully. "I am half human and half orc. Do people hate me too?" The pain in Sebastian's chest was acute. "Some might if they met you. But that is because of their own fear, not because of anything you have done or are. You are perfect, Thura. Do not ever believe otherwise." Grusha wrapped their daughter in a fierce hug. "You are our hope, little one. Hope that someday the world will be different, that people will see past their old hatreds. Until then, we keep you safe here, where you are loved completely." Thura seemed to accept this explanation, though Sebastian could see the question still forming in her bright eyes. As she returned to her planting, he and Grusha shared a look of concern. Their daughter would not remain content with isolation forever. Eventually, she would want to see the world beyond their homestead, and they could not protect her from that world indefinitely. The seasons continued their cycle, and Thura grew taller and stronger. When she was 7, she watched her father practice with his sword, a skill he had maintained despite the peaceful life they had built. She begged him to teach her, and after some discussion, Sebastian and Grusha agreed. They taught her together, Sebastian showing her human swordsmanship while Grusha taught her orc staff techniques. Thura absorbed it all eagerly, blending the styles into something uniquely her own. "She is a natural warrior," Grusha observed one day, watching Thura practice the forms they had taught her. "But she has a gentle heart. That is a rare combination." "She gets the warrior from you and the gentle heart from me," Sebastian teased, earning himself a playful shove from his wife. "Or perhaps it is the other way around. You are the gentlest person I know when you want to be." They were happy, truly happy in their isolated corner of the world, but both Sebastian and Grusha knew their peace could not last forever. The world had a way of intruding. No matter how carefully you built your walls, the intrusion came when Thura was 9 years old in the form of soldiers. Not the usual supply wagon, but a full squad of armed men who rode up to the homestead with weapons drawn. Sebastian saw them coming and immediately called for Grusha and Thura to get inside. He stepped onto the porch alone, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Sebastian Lawson," the squad leader called out, a hard-faced man with lieutenant's insignia. "By order of the council, you are to surrender the half-breed child into our custody. There have been reports of orc raiders in the area, and the council has deemed it too dangerous to leave her in your care." Sebastian's blood turned to ice. "Reports from whom? We have seen no raiders." "This is a pretense to take my daughter." "That is not for you to question," the lieutenant replied. "Hand over the child and you and the orc can remain here unmolested. Refuse, and we will take her by force." Behind Sebastian, the door opened, and Grusha emerged with Thura clutching her hand. Grusha's face was a mask of cold fury, and Sebastian recognized the warrior he had first met in the courtyard years ago. She had her staff in her free hand, and her entire posture screamed danger. "You will not touch our daughter," Grusha said, her voice deadly quiet. "We have lived here peacefully for a decade, harming no one. Thura is innocent. She has done nothing to warrant this persecution." "She is an abomination," one of the soldiers muttered, loud enough to be heard. Neither one thing nor another. Who knows what she will become? Thura's hand tightened on her mother's skirt, and Sebastian saw fear in his daughter's eyes for the first time. The sight ignited a rage in him that he had not felt since the day he struck Captain Hendricks. "My daughter is a person," Sebastian said, his voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "She is kind, intelligent, loving. She has never harmed anyone. If you try to take her, you will have to go through both of us, and I promise you that will not end well for anyone." The lieutenant's hand moved to his sword. "Do not be foolish, Lawson. You are one man and one orc woman. We are 12 soldiers. This is not a fight you can win." "Perhaps not," Grusha said, stepping forward to stand beside Sebastian. "But we will make you pay dearly for every step you take toward our daughter. How many of your men are you willing to sacrifice for the Council's paranoia?" The standoff stretched taut as a drawn bowstring. Sebastian could see the soldiers assessing the situation, weighing the likelihood of casualties against their orders. He and Grusha were both trained fighters, and the soldiers knew it. This would not be a simple arrest. Then Thura did something unexpected. She stepped out from behind her mother, her small chin raised defiantly despite the fear Sebastian could see she was fighting. "I will go with you," she said, her voice wavering only slightly. "If it means my parents will not be hurt, I will go." "No," Sebastian and Grusha said in unison, absolute and final. "Thura, get back inside," Sebastian ordered, his voice brooking no argument, but his daughter shook her head. "I do not want anyone to die because of me," Thura said, tears streaming down her face now. "Please, Papa, Mama. Do not fight them. I will be brave. I will come back to you somehow." Sebastian felt his heart shatter. His daughter, his beautiful, courageous daughter, was willing to sacrifice herself to protect them. It was exactly the kind of selflessness they had taught her, but he had never imagined it would be turned against them like this. "We are not letting you go," Grusha said fiercely, pulling Thura back against her. "Not now, not ever. You are our child, and we protect what is ours." The lieutenant was growing impatient. "Enough of this. Men, prepare to advance. Try not to kill them, but do what you must to secure the child." The soldiers began to move forward in formation, and Sebastian knew they were out of time. He drew his sword, hearing Grusha take her fighting stance beside him with her staff at the ready. They would fight, they would lose, but they would show these men exactly what it cost to try to take their child. Then a voice rang out from the forest edge, strong and commanding. "Hold!" Everyone froze, turning to see who had spoken. From the tree line emerged a group of figures that made Sebastian's breath catch. Orcs, a full war party, led by a massive warrior with scars crisscrossing his green skin, but they were not advancing in attack formation. They approached slowly, weapons sheathed with the war leader at the front. The orc leader's eyes swept over the scene, taking in the armed soldiers, Sebastian and Grusha standing defensively, and most importantly, Thura. His expression, which had been hard as stone, softened slightly when he looked at the child. "I am Durak, war chief of the northern clans," the orc said in surprisingly good common tongue. "That child you seek to take is my granddaughter. If you wish to take her, you will have to go through not just her parents, but my entire war party. And I promise you, human soldiers, that is a fight none of you will survive." The lieutenant's face had gone pale. "War Chief Durak, we did not know. The council did not mention any orcish involvement." "Because the council does not know everything," Durak said, his voice dripping with disdain. He turned to Grusha and his expression shifted to something more complicated. Regret, perhaps, pride. "Daughter, it has been many years." Grusha straightened, her grip on her staff not relaxing. "Father." "Why are you here?" "Because word reached me that humans were planning to take my granddaughter from her home," Durak replied. Because I have spent 10 years regretting the choice I made to exile you, because I am old enough now to admit when I was wrong." He looked at Sebastian, assessing him with a warrior's eye. "You must be the human who chose my daughter over his own people. I owe you thanks for keeping her safe, for giving her the life I could not." Sebastian was reeling from this turn of events, but he kept his sword raised. "I need no thanks. Grusha and Thura are my family. I would protect them with my life. I see that. I respect it." Durak turned back to the lieutenant. "You will leave now. Tell your council that the child is under the protection of the northern clans. If they send soldiers again, it will be considered an act of war." "Am I understood?" The lieutenant clearly wanted to argue, but he was outnumbered and outmatched. After a tense moment, he nodded curtly. "Understood. We will relay your message to the council." He signaled his men, and they began to retreat, mounting their horses and riding away with undisguised relief. Once the soldiers were gone, Durak approached the porch slowly, his hands visible and empty of weapons. "May I meet my granddaughter properly?" he asked, and the request was directed at both Sebastian and Grusha. Grusha looked at Sebastian, uncertainty written across her face. He gave her a small nod, trusting her judgment. She turned to Thura, kneeling down to the child's level. "Thura, this is my father, your grandfather from the Orc clans. He has come a long way to meet you. Would you like to say hello?" Thura studied the massive Orc warchief with wide eyes, then nodded slowly. She stepped forward, and Durak lowered himself to one knee to be closer to her height. Up close, Sebastian could see the similarities between father and daughter, the same set to the jaw, the same intensity in the eyes. "Hello, grandfather," Thura said softly. "Thank you for protecting us from the soldiers." Durak's hard expression cracked, and something that might have been a smile touched his scarred face. "Hello, little one. You look like your mother did at your age, brave and strong. I am sorry it has taken me so long to meet you." He looked up at Grusha. "I am sorry for many things, daughter. I let old hatreds and pride blind me to what was important. You chose honor and compassion over endless war, and I punished you for it. I was a fool." Grusha's eyes were shining with tears. "You cast me out. You said I was no longer your daughter." "I was wrong," Durak said simply. "If you can forgive an old warrior his mistakes, I would like to know my daughter again, and my granddaughter. I cannot undo the past, but perhaps we can build a different future." Sebastian watched his wife struggle with a decade of pain and anger, saw the moment when love and longing won out over old hurts. Grusha stepped forward and embraced her father, and the massive Orc warrior wrapped his arms around her carefully, as if afraid she might break. "You can know Thura," Grusha said into her father's shoulder, "but Sebastian and I will not be separated from our daughter. We are a family. If you want to be part of that family, you accept all of us." "I would not ask otherwise," Durak said. He released Grusha and stood, extending his hand to Sebastian. "You protected my daughter when I failed her. You gave her a life of love and dignity. You have my respect, Sebastian Lawson, and my thanks." Sebastian shook the offered hand, feeling the strength in Durak's grip. "She gave me far more than I ever gave her. Your daughter is the bravest, strongest person I have ever known. I am honored to be her husband." The war party that Durak had brought set up camp near the homestead, and over the next few days, an unexpected gathering took place. Grusha's mother arrived, weeping with joy at being reunited with her daughter and meeting her granddaughter. Grusha's younger brother, now a grown warrior himself, embraced his sister and swore to protect Thura with his life. Other members of the clan came to pay their respects, and Sebastian found himself hosting a strange celebration of reconciliation. Thura flourished with the attention from her Orcish family, eagerly learning about her mother's culture and heritage. But each night, She returned to her parents, sleeping between them as she had when she was much younger, as if reassuring herself that they were still there. On the 5th day, Durak approached Sebastian and Grusha with a proposal. The northern clans have been in negotiations with several human settlements about a lasting peace treaty. The war has cost both our peoples too much. You and your daughter, you are living proof that orcs and humans can coexist, can build something beautiful together. Would you be willing to speak at the peace talks? To show the doubters on both sides that there is another way? Sebastian and Grusha looked at each other, the silent communication of a couple who had spent years learning to read each other's thoughts. Then they looked at Thura, who was watching them with hope and trust. Yes, Grusha said, we will speak, for our daughter and for all the children who come after her, so they do not have to grow up in a world that hates them for existing. We will tell our story, Sebastian added. How we were given to each other as punishment and found love instead. How we built a life together despite everything trying to tear us apart. And we will show them Thura, proof that the next generation does not have to repeat the mistakes of the past. The peace talks were held in neutral territory, a wide meadow between human and orc lands. Representatives from both sides gathered, along with a growing crowd of witnesses. Sebastian stood before them all, his wife on one side and his daughter on the other, and told their story. He spoke of kindness in the face of hatred, of choosing compassion over anger, of building rather than destroying. Grusha spoke of being cast out for refusing to participate in violence, of finding unexpected love and partnership. She spoke of the strength it took to create rather than destroy, to nurture life in the midst of a world consumed by death. And Thura, brave and beautiful, stood before two peoples who had taught their children to fear and hate each other, and she spoke with the wisdom of a child who had been raised with love. I am half human and half orc, she said, her clear voice carrying across the meadow. I am proof that we do not have to be enemies. I love my parents, both of them. I love my grandparents, both human and orc, though I have only just met my orc family. There is nothing wrong with me. There is nothing wrong with love between different peoples. The only thing wrong is the hatred that keeps us apart. There were those in the crowd who remained unmoved, whose prejudices ran too deep to be swayed by one family's story. But there were others, many others, who looked at Sebastian and Grusha and Thura and saw possibility. They saw hope for a future where their children did not have to die in endless war, where love could cross the boundaries of species and culture. The peace treaty was signed that day, the first real accord between humans and orcs in generations. It was tentative, fragile, and would require constant work to maintain. But it was a beginning, and that was more than had existed before. Sebastian, Grusha, and Thura returned to their homestead in the Thornwood, but they were no longer isolated. The supply wagon came monthly as before, but now it was accompanied by trade goods and friendly words. Grusha's family visited regularly, and eventually, a few human settlers built homes nearby, drawn by the promise of peaceful coexistence. The area became known as Bridgetown, named for the family that had built the first bridge between two warring peoples. Years passed in contentment. Thura grew into a remarkable young woman, trained in both human and orc fighting styles, educated in healing and scholarship, confident in her unique identity. She became a negotiator and diplomat in her own right, helping to resolve conflicts between human and orc communities. She was living proof of her parents' belief that love could overcome hatred. Sebastian and Grusha grew older together, their love deepening with each passing season. They watched their daughter thrive, and eventually fall in love herself with a young man from one of the nearby settlements. A human farmer who saw Thura for the extraordinary person she was rather than the strangeness of her heritage. The wedding was attended by both humans and orcs, another bridge built, another step toward lasting peace. On their 20th anniversary of the day they had been exiled to the homestead, Sebastian and Grusha sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had countless times before. But now the view included the lights of Bridgetown in the distance, the smoke from friendly chimneys, the sounds of a community living in harmony. "You ever regret it?" Grusha asked quietly, her head resting on Sebastian's shoulder. "Everything you gave up, everything you lost, to end up here with me." Sebastian wrapped his arm around his wife, marveling as he always did at how perfectly she fit against him. "I gave up a life of following orders from men without honor, participating in a war I did not believe in, living without real love or purpose. What did I lose exactly? Nothing that mattered. Everything that matters is right here." "We were meant to be each other's punishment," Grusha said with a soft laugh. "The council could not have been more wrong if they tried." "No, they gave me the greatest gift imaginable," Sebastian replied. "They gave me you and you gave me everything else. Our daughter, our home, our community, a life with meaning. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Grusha turned to kiss him, and the gesture was as full of love as it had been the first time years ago in this same house. "I love you, Sebastian Lawson, my husband, my partner, my heart." "I love you, Grusha Lawson, from the first day to the last, and all the days in between." They sat together as the stars began to appear, content in the life they had built from the ruins of their punishment. They had been given to each other as enemies, as outcasts, as a cruel joke by a council that could not see past its own prejudice. But they had chosen love instead of hatred, partnership instead of isolation, hope instead of despair. And in choosing each other, they had changed not just their own lives, but the world around them. They had shown that bridges could be built, that love could cross any boundary, that the supposed differences between peoples were nothing compared to the commonalities of kindness, compassion, and the universal desire for connection. Their story became legend in Bridgetown and beyond, told to children of both species as an example of what was possible when people chose love over fear. Sebastian and Grusha lived long, full lives, surrounded by family and friends, in the home they had transformed from a punishment into a paradise. And when they were very old and gray, still holding hands as they had for decades, they would look at each other and smile, knowing that every moment of struggle, every challenge they had faced had been worth it. Because they had found something rare and precious in this world. True love, true partnership, and the joy of building something beautiful together against all odds. They had been given to each other as punishment, but they had treated each other like royalty from day one. And in doing so, they had become exactly that. A king and queen of their own small kingdom, built on love, defended by family, and sustained by the unwavering belief that kindness and compassion could triumph over hatred and fear. Their legacy lived on in their daughter, in their grandchildren, and in every person in Bridgetown who chose to see beyond the surface differences and embrace the common humanity that connected them all. Sebastian and Grusha had proven that love knew no boundaries, that families could be built by choice as well as blood, and that even the cruelest punishment could be transformed into the greatest blessing. And as they watched the sun set on their 20th anniversary, and their 30th and eventually their 50th, they knew with absolute certainty that they had lived a good life, a meaningful life, a life full of love. They had been outcasts together, and in that exile they had found home.